First of all, welcome everyone here at the Wolt HQ and everyone at the Zoom webinar. Nice to have you all here. First, a bit of introduction. I'm Untamo Hirvonen. I'm the QA competence lead at Wolt. That means that I'm kind of the responsible for technical recruitment of our QA engineers, handling these sort of events as well. Part of that, wearing that hat, and also I'm the group QA for our Wolt Market group, which consists of 5 development teams, where I'm the only QA supporting the whole group. But that's about that and about me. Let's move on to the next slide, which is something about Wolt. Most of you probably know what Wolt is, so I'm not going to go through like what we are doing here, but there's some tidbits that you might have not known. For example, we are in 23 countries currently. There's also Japan there, so we're not only in Europe. And yeah, we are in plus 250 cities as well. So there's a lot of different nationalities, different needs to different countries and how we operate there. And then it brings us challenges when we build software that's supposed to work and be of high quality in all of those areas. And for building that product, we have plus 550 folks here at Wolt across product leadership, engineering, where myself is, data scientist, and then also the design folks as well. So we have a huge group here working on the product. We have tech hubs, which means that we have an office where we are having a engineering presence. So we have Helsinki, Berlin, Stockholm, and Tel Aviv. And as we are sort of a remote company, you can work everywhere in those countries as well. So you don't need to necessarily work in Helsinki, although working at the office sometimes is good fun, like today. Okay. A bit of a content review, what we're going to do here today. We're going to have a bit of an interactive session in the beginning. Okay, a bit about the content today. First of all, we are going to have an interactive session where you get to make some test cases and be a tester. Don't worry, it's going to be super easy. You probably know it already how to do it. We're going to discuss, obviously, what is quality. What is quality in software development? What is quality in products? That sort of thing. Then about the quality mindset that you're supposed to have in order to build high quality products. How to get that? What does it mean? And when we are talking about the quality as in software development, where teams are working on features, it is important that everyone is responsible for achieving that quality. So there shouldn't be one person who handles the quality for the team or for those features. So there should be co-ownership, everyone owning the quality of their product end to end. We're going to discuss a bit about requirements and planning, how to make sure that you plan your work ahead accordingly. And then we do some summary of the contents, ending with a Q&A. And I believe we have some sort of a prize draw as well for the folks who dare to come to the office. Cool. So how would you test the Wolt Courier backpack? Here at the office, you can see the Wolt Courier backpack. If you haven't seen that already, if you don't know what it looks like, you probably have seen it around the city with the courier partners wearing it on their back. So now I would like to ask you folks here to do a bit of an exercise where you think of test cases for ensuring the quality of this backpack. So when the courier partners go to the restaurants, pick up your food, then they deliver it to your doorstep, how would you ensure that this product works? There's some examples for you, so you don't need to know everything in advance. So it should fit an extra large pizza in it. That's kind of convenient. You should be able to wear it on your back when you're riding a bicycle, that sort of thing. So super basic things. But how would you go about it? So let's do, let's say 5 minutes of everyone. You can discuss it with your person next to you. form groups, whatever, and then I'm going to ask a bit volunteers to say those test cases, and I'm going to show a bit about how sort of things what we found out. So let's do a bit of an exercise. Go. So that would be about 5 minutes. Has everyone been able to find out some test cases for the courier backpack? At least there's some discussion still going. Cool. All right, let's hear those. So let's get a few of those test cases first from the Zoom chat. So Senia, please go ahead.
Yeah, we have some amazing notes here. So first of all, for example, the backpack should be waterproof. And for example, a Coca-Cola bottle shouldn't break, or if it breaks inside, it shouldn't leak. And the food should not be flying around in the back during transport. So it should sit firmly without pouring away. What else? Of course, the food should keep warm enough. And wow, there are so many. Thank you everyone for answering here in the chat as well. The bag should not be too wide so that it hits other people in traffic. That's really nice one. Pizza boxes should be dry and safe in case of rain. And it shouldn't be too heavy on its own. And last one, let's take one more. So big logos for adverts. And then shall we hear some answers from the room here?
Yes,
in the HQ?
I was thinking about color and how is it reflective at night? Because some of the Wolt drivers at night, they have to do what's called cycle or drive through motorcycle. It's not safe for them. I was thinking that maybe the Wolt can be reflective so that when the cars hit on it, it's also an advertisement of Volts. It's like brainwashing people. Buy Volts.
That's like a product mindset already.
Hello? Yeah. Free advertising.
Yeah, great.
Anyone else? Hi, we were thinking about the temperature. So how about if someone orders warm food and ice cream at the same time? How does that work?
Nice. And one more about having different orders. So you can definitely understand which one to which customer.
Any more from this side? Yes. Let me run to you.
I don't know if I missed, but the ergonomics of just the usage was not mentioned, like how different size people or couriers can use it. Is it adjustable and can it be used by people?
That's what we call an accessibility testing. So you should be able to carry the same backpack, even if you are shorter, taller, and other things like that. So a lot of good ideas. We actually thought of all of those and maybe a bunch of others as well. And I bet you had way more up your sleeve. But what we came up with was also the classic hot and cold combo, which is you order something hot and then cold, like wings and a milkshake. Obviously, when the food arrives, the wings should be hot and the milkshake cold. So the temperature should be contained inside. Yeah, I think everyone said the rain shouldn't leak into the backpack. Yeah, the pizza box being wet when it arrives would be a total bummer. And yeah, the accessibility is also something that we put there as well, that it's easy to use, easy to carry around and for everyone, not just like the just one person. One thing that we were thinking is that if courier falls, backpack and the content should remain intact and in shape. That's a bit harder. I'm not sure if that's capable of doing it, but I guess that would be the highest quality of you can get if the contents remain intact, even though you crash your bike. But anyway, this was just to kind of show you that it's relatively easy to be a tester when you have the mindset that, okay, you think of like what could go wrong for who is the customer here, who is using the backpack. You start to come up with all of those different cases, and then it starts to just evolve from there. You think about the accessibility, you think about the different environmental impacts and whatnot. So everyone essentially is a tester. That's what I wanted to emphasize here. But then if we think about the quality, there are definitions made by wiser people than I am, who derived this standard of 25010, which says that quality is of these attributes. So there are functional suitability, reliability, performance, efficiency, security, transferability, compatibility, maintainability, operability. So a lot of ilities. I don't know why they picked all of those, but anyway, quality is a hard concept to grasp and to sort of evaluate. Like everyone knows, like in some extent on your own subjective view that, okay, this is of high quality. How can we sort of measure that, and how can we make sure that the product that we are building is of high quality when most of the people might have different opinions, like they have seen better, they have seen worse, they compare the product to a different version and stuff like that. So then we start to sort of think of it in a smaller terms. And whoa. Then when we think about the quality, we also think about testing, like the test cases that we just came up with. When you think about the testing for the product, there are two different sort of ways that are done when it comes to software development, to be exact. So the functional testing is something that focuses on the user's perspective. So that is essentially what we were doing now. We were thinking about, okay, who is the customer, what is the user, how will they use this backpack, etc. And then there are the accessibility as well, ease of use, absence of defects. Is it a faulty product or not? We can test that as well, trying to break it in a way that, okay, does it fall apart in the case of the backpack? Then there are multiple ways to do non-functional testing. Thank you. Maybe this works better. Non-functional testing then is more of a technical term where we discuss the sort of architecture, how we build the software, how we maintain the system, what is the performance. Like, let's say, probably the backpack is not a good example anymore. So let's think about Wolt app. It should be easy to use and sort of fast to use even on any sort of mobile device. So you might have the lowest like priced Android phone. It should work pretty well on that device as it works on an iPhone 14 or whatever the latest one might be. We need to think about the performance. So it should work well for all of the different types of customers that we have. Also, security is obviously nowadays even more important than it might have been before because of how much user data all of the different apps might collect. How do you use the data? How do you make sure that it doesn't leak? You don't use it to like, you need to anonymize it and whatnot when you are using it. The security is very important, and that's something that you can then test as well to find like security flaws in the app. And one key phrase that we like to do in the QA world is the verification and validation. So asking those two questions at the bottom. And I always forget which one is verification and which one is validation. So bear with me. Luckily, I pointed out here, so I remember. We're asking a question of, are we building the product right? So this is verification to the requirements. This is what we were supposed to do. This is what we did. Is it the same? And we sort of compare that. That is called verification. And then we think about, are we building the right product? Then it gets interesting when we think about like, okay, what is our customer? Who are we building this product for? Is it easy to use? Is it for everyone? Is it accessible? Then that gets a bit something that might get lost when you're building a product, that you only think about the first part. You think about the requirements. This is the list of it. This is the list of things we're going to test. And then we say, okay, we match all of the requirements. But then in the validation, it's more complicated. So you need to really step into the user's shoes, use the product, understand how it works, to make sure that you test it right. We get back to the LEDs again. So for a product, it is important that the product is reliable. So it needs to work in different time zones, different countries, different operating systems. It needs to work on web. It needs to work on an app. In our case, obviously with the Wolt. So it needs to be reliable. When Wolt is down, when people are trying to order their dinner, it's a huge bummer. And so we need to make sure that our app is always on and always available for our customers. Then when we get to maintainability, that's a bit more a technical term. So when you build a product, you think of it as new features and a bunch of existing things that you've already done. You have built existing code for creating this feature. You need to make sure that you are able to maintain that part of the code going forward. So most likely you don't want to cut corners. You want to make sure that this is properly tested. It is maintainable. It's easy to add new features. If you want to change a bit how one feature works, it should be easy, because otherwise we're going to be really slow in developing new features. Efficiency is also important, that we use the computing resources that we have available efficiently. So as I mentioned, the case of having a, let's say, lower end Android phone, it should work well on that piece of mobile phone as well as it would work on a machine that has more computing resources. Let's say on your huge PC gaming rig where you use it to order Wolt. I don't know why would you do that, but anyway. Testability is important, especially from my point of view as a QA. It should be that when developers start to build their new features, they think about already before they write any single line of code, that how am I going to test this? And if they don't ask that question, they end up writing code that is suboptimal. It might be hard to test. Then they might default to an excuse of, yeah, I don't have time to write the test because, well, I initially wrote it in a way that now it's not testable. So I need to spend a lot of time to refactor it, which is essentially creating it again and again until I'm able to write the tests. So how we can tackle testability is that we separate different features and different parts of the app into different modules or parts of the code, and make sure that we can test those single modules in isolation, and making sure that we can those modules can be then looked at as a collection of even smaller units, that then you can test those smaller units and even smaller units and piece of code, like down to one line of code that you can test only this, because then you get the most perfect results when you're testing it in that way. Security is important. As I mentioned, user data is nowadays, and user privacy is of utmost importance. We should make sure that we handle the customer's data with care, and we keep it in a way that the customer, as where in GDPR, you can request that, hey, I want all of my data from Wolt that you have gathered from me during these years that I've been using it. We are able to do that for the customer. That's very important. So we shouldn't be careless when it comes to user data. It should be taken with good care. So the product quality is for the user. Obviously, we want to make sure that what the product is that we're building is of very high quality. Now Zoom decided to say connecting on top of my slides. And now it did it again, right? Let's try again. Cool. What I was saying is that in order to build high quality products, think about the user, you need to have a quality mindset. What that means is that you already have one part of that quality mindset in you based on the exercise we just did. Which is all of us are testers. So you don't need necessarily a background in computer sciences, like I don't. And I can still be able to test things. I can still test the app, the software. And this is especially important when we think about a team who is working on a feature or part of the app. Let's say we have a team lead, we have 2 front-end developers and 2 back-end developers, maybe designer and a data analytics person. And then there's me, myself, who is trying to say to the team that, hey, all of you are testers. You don't need me to do the testing for you. You already know these things. So when you work together to test your stuff, it's going to get way better over time. Quality will improve. So you need to think like your user. You need to really use the app you are building or the product to understand what the features it has and how to use them. This is like the main point that people might miss when they start to develop a product or a software, that they don't really use the system at all. Like it's especially hard for systems that you are not like the demographic of a user. In the case of Wolt app, most of us who work here definitely use the app a lot. We know how it works inside and out. And when you're actually building something into a product that you're using yourself, it's even more like useful for you to then, when you know these things, you are already the user and you can understand how to build it better over time. This is a slide that I like to show to developers quite often, which is sort of separating the sort of act of writing code for a product and then when we are actually building a product. Many developers might say that, hey, I really like to just write code. I don't really care like what is the product. I just want to sort of solve puzzles in the code. Like that's essentially what we're doing. We're solving problems with the code. But if you are just focusing on the piece of code and not on the user's problem, then the quality will definitely be less than when you would be customer obsessed. And you know that, okay, this is how they're going to use it. This is the problem I'm going to solve. When you know all of those things, it's much easier to then adapt that into writing the actual implementation and the code. As a team, it helps if you work towards a common goal. So meaning that the team actually takes ownership of the quality themselves. They don't have an external person who will be doing all of the testing for them. In Wolt, we have this setup where, as I mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, is that I work with 5 development teams at the same time, which means that those 5 teams need to work together to build the quality product that they are. I cannot go there to every single team and go doing tests for them. Like that doesn't scale at all. Like I cannot do 5 things at the same time. I barely can do 1 thing at the same time. So if the team does work towards a common goal, they become more efficient. And efficiency usually leads to higher quality. At least that's by the statistics. So if you don't work towards a common goal, you sort of get to this mindset that, yeah, I'm just writing my piece of code and that's it. you leave these silos of information behind, that you are the only one probably knowing this part and the other guy knows this part. And then if you don't do this knowledge sharing between that, okay, what is the product we're building? How does this part and this part actually connect? Then there will be issues, and we are not aware of things happening outside that piece of code. So we miss the whole product. When the team takes ownership, it creates a higher engagement, also higher quality. When you really actually use the system and the product, you get this sort of an ownership, and you take somewhat of a pride when you work on a product. You want it to be great, obviously. We don't want to build like bad products, but that does happen sometimes. If you only focus on code, then you might miss what you're building, and which is that you should be focusing on making value for the customer and not focusing on just writing lines of code. So at this point, someone might ask that, okay, but if we could get Untamo to every single team we have, wouldn't that be great? Then we wouldn't need to worry about testing, and we could just leave the responsibility on you. You would be our man to do the thing. Well, that comes with downsides, obviously, like the scaling. Like I cannot do 5 things at the same time. I cannot be at 5 places at the same time. So one person testing everything leads to no ownership of the team. Team always builds something and then they sort of throws it over the fence to someone else to make sure that it works. And then that person throws it back to the team that, oh yeah, this didn't work, please fix. If everyone does the testing, they will understand the whole product end to end, and they take ownership of it. They make sure that it works. They start to get pride or think about being proud of their work. And obviously, if there's only one person doing the testing, it will be a bottleneck. That person cannot do everything, and probably they shouldn't do everything. Also, it's error prone, like people make mistakes, like you cannot find every single issue in a product, even if you would spend like a week on it. So obviously there will be mistakes made. There will be mistakes made by the developer. There will be mistakes made by the tester, obviously. But if there are more people doing that testing, when people still make mistakes, there's still more eyes on this, and maybe someone catches it. That's at least the idea, that if I didn't catch it, then the next guy would. And that's the whole beauty of it. And yeah, as I've been preaching, the user point of view will be missing if you are not actually using the system and testing it. Testing is mostly just using the product, trying out different things. It's not about only that you have a specific test case. Like, can I wear that backpack on my back? You put it on, you're like, yeah, good to go. You do way more than that. You think about it, okay, how can I put it on? How can I get it off my back? You start to think about way more different things when you're kind of using it. So the testing is not necessarily just going by the book or a checklist. Yeah, I did this. It's more about when you do that, you also think about how could this go wrong? Like, how could this not work? And then it gets into a territory where you discover improvements that you can build into the product. When you're thinking about like, okay, there's actually a way to make this break. And that's something that the developers also admire, or like they want to see that when there is a issue that they couldn't break it, they say, like, I couldn't break it. I tried it for a couple of hours. Then there will be this one QA person who comes in, and first thing they do this, and then everything goes to shit. And then they're like, hey, what did you do? And then they find this edge case and they can work on it. Obviously, it doesn't work like that. We are not like magicians who find bugs all the time. But sometimes when you have a different perspective on things, you discover issues way easier. So how do we do quality at Wolt? Like traditionally is how quality is done and in the companies is the exact way that I just described, that there is one tester in a team and the team sort of builds a product or feature, then they throw this feature to the tester, they test it a while, and then they throw it back like, yeah, there were 5 bugs, please fix them. We don't necessarily do that at Wolt, so we don't use the term quality assurance at all. We like to brand ourselves as doing quality assistance. What does that then mean is that we do these 3 different things with the teams. So we help out in test planning, which is super important, the whole planning, which I'll come back to in the later stages of this presentation. When you think about the planning, is that you should have an objective of what you're going to build. If you don't have that, then probably you shouldn't do it at all. If you don't know, like, why are we doing this? What is the problem that we're going to solve for the customer with this feature? When that is defined, we can think about the risks. And then you get to this phase where you think about like, okay, what could go wrong? Like if you are a worrying type of person, this comes very naturally to you to think about like, okay, this could go wrong. Like they could do this and oh boy, and then they do this. And did you think about like this other thing here? And then when you map out all of those risks, even before you have started to build anything, then you have a good sort of a checklist to go through that you can then find ways to mitigate those. Find ways that, okay, we don't end up causing this problem to even happen in the first place. That is something that we try to help out the teams with, asking at times very stupid questions. What if the user does this? And then the developer is like, yeah, but that's not how it's supposed to be used. But that's what the customer is going to do. They're going to click this. What happens? I don't know. It breaks. And then they find out that, yeah, we need to make sure that, yeah, the customer doesn't do that. Maybe it's not as easy to use as we thought. Like for the customer, it's not as obvious. Like, yeah, they should do this and this, like we defined. They don't know. They would like click all over the place and do whatever. They don't know how it's supposed to work. So it should be easy to use as well. If you think about all of those things in advance, good things will happen. When you understand the risks, it's easier then to figure out what should we test and where should we focus on. It brings to the testing scope. Let's focus on first going through this list of risks. Let's make sure that this doesn't happen. And we can test those things first and then come up with some extra test cases after that. One thing that we do with the developers is that we coach them about the whole quality mindset. Everyone is a tester. You sort of repeat these same things over and over again. Hey, did you think about the user? Like who are you building it for? Do you even know who is going to use this? How are they going to use it? And if they don't have the user perspective, they might build it the wrong way. Like they take assumptions that this is the user, this is the way they use it, even though we would have planned it well. But then in the development phase, you start to take like shortcuts. Maybe, yeah, I do this. Yeah, the customer doesn't care about this at all, or this is not as important as you would guess. So we need to make sure that when you're building something, you think about like, okay, who is the user we are building this for? We ask a bunch of different things from the developers. We have these sessions called pair testing sessions, where we might test their feature. They have built something, a feature. What I've been doing myself is that I'm not even testing anything. I'm just there to be sort of a rubber duck for the developer, which means that I'll just ask like, yeah, just walk me through the feature. How did you build it? How it works? And then when they start to explain this, they need to go to the user's shoes and actually use the system. And then when they are there, they realize like, yeah, actually, this is a bit weird that it works like this. Oh yeah, clicking this button and then showing this view doesn't really make sense. Why did I write it this way? Maybe I need to do something about it. Like I don't even need to ask anything. Usually the developer comes up with all of these questions themselves. I'm like nodding, yeah, true. Probably they're going to do that, yeah. And then I might ask some questions like, yeah, wait, on the previous page, what if I click that? What happens? Yeah, like, yeah, but don't click. No, click. What happens? Ask those sort of things. Those are like super obvious things, but when you're building something, you forget about those things because you're so laser focused on building this feature that you don't really think about like what is there around that feature and how are they going to use it. And that has been super valuable for making sure that we build the right product. It has brought out a lot of good improvement ideas as well that we think of like, yeah, actually, let's make this even better like this. So they cannot click this button, like there is no button. Let's remove it. It doesn't matter. And the third part is that we do testing parties. Those are sort of exciting and of course fun. But what we do there is that how I did it at the office at one time was that I asked everyone to join in on a meeting room. There were like, let's say 15 people joining in. I brought donuts for everyone. And then we spent 1.5 hours testing the feature that we just built together with the whole team. And when everyone was doing that, there was a lot of good discussion going on. Like, yeah, we can actually improve this here. And then someone found a bug. It was like a huge success. Like, okay, we actually managed to find a bug before we shipped this to the customers because we do the testing parties before we have released it to the customers. And those have been super valuable for the people to understand what we're building. When that feature is there on the whole app, you kind of see that, okay, how this interacts with the other systems that we have built, how it works, how the customers use it. And we find those small improvements when you're actually using it. Otherwise, we could just ship it and then the customers would say that, yeah, have you thought about improving this? Yeah, this could be way easier to do like this. Most of those things can be figured out in the testing parties when you just are using the system and kind of talking about it, doing this sort of rubber duck thing where someone explains what they're doing and others are sort of commenting like, yeah, what if you do this? What happens? And obviously those are fun events, especially if you lure developers with donuts. That works every single time. People like donuts a lot. So working together brings this sort of teamwork, ownership for the team. Everyone is there working on the same thing. I know this might be a bit hard to grasp. Bear with me. I added this a week back into the slides. This is very development focused, but let's maybe do a quick walkthrough of what happens here. If we start at the middle in the discover phase and think about the sort of continuous testing happening. So this is essentially a life cycle of building a product. We do discovery work, we plan, we understand how it works, then we build it, then we deploy it, release to the customers, we observe how it works, then we do some learning, and then we start again. So this is sort of the loop that happens in software development all the time. So how do you build testing as part of this whole life cycle? In every single part, you can do multiple ways of testing. So at the beginning, in the discover phase, you are testing the ideas, determine the value, like, okay, does this feature even make any sense? Is this providing value for the user? How could we probably want to ask feedback from the customers even beforehand, like, okay, what sort of feature would you like? How should it work? How can that solve the problem you have? Then we plan on, okay, how can we make this happen? We identify the risks. We test the assumptions. Does this work? Maybe this doesn't work. When we do the planning, we shift to understanding what we're going to build. We can build some sort of a prototype first to understand how it would look like, probably a rough design on how the feature should look like. And now I get, again, the Zoom connecting thing. Is there like a limit? How long can I do this or what? Anyway, when you start to understand how it works, you have the designs, you have seen how it should look like, then you start to build it. And at that point, you think about, okay, what were the risks that we mapped out in the beginning? What could go wrong? And then start to think about from those things like, okay, let's build it in a way that we can mitigate those problems. Let's write some tests to make sure that when I write this piece of code, it works. I write the next one and I write the test for that as well. And iterating over that until we get to a phase where we are satisfied that this is the feature we want to deploy. And in the deployment, we can run all of those tests that we built in an automated fashion. So we wrote tests for the code, we can run it, we can see the green check mark, everything works, great. Now we got the confidence that, okay, we can actually release this to the customers. When we do that, we might want to do some user testing. We might have a beta testing group, for example, that are like early adopters of Wolt, and they can use the app and give us that like first time feedback immediately when we release something. We have a lot of those folks using the system, like the latest and greatest features. And that is super important to get the early feedback so we can iterate on it. We observe how it works. Are we using the proper amount of resources, for example? Are we using something that, like, is it using too much resources? Maybe we do need to do some optimization somewhere. And we can see that, okay, there are no issues happening. We don't get any warnings or alerts that this system is not behaving or anything like that. Or if we do get, then that's the perfect place for learning. To think about like, okay, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? We get customer feedback. Let's learn from that as well. We get bug reports. Okay, this didn't work out. Let's make sure that next time, okay, let's first fix the bug, but then let's also figure out next time, how can we prevent this from happening? That's the key idea of quality assistance as well, that we do prevention and not just like fixing things. We want to prevent them not happening like afterwards. And then we repeat this cycle again and again. Hopefully when we have learned more, this becomes even more like efficient, this whole flow of discovering, planning, and etc. So testing is not just at the phase of building something. You can do testing in every single place here in the life cycle, hence the continuous testing. I did discuss a bit about the requirements in the beginning and the importance of planning. There are a couple of technical things here called functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Let's come back to the same sort of place where we were at the beginning of doing functional testing or non-functional testing. So when we do the requirements of, okay, the functional requirements are how the data flows in this system. So let's say we have a pop-up for the user that says that, hey, please fill in this detail. They write their details in, they click submit. What happens with that data? How do we use it afterwards? What are the inputs and outputs of our system? How the operations work, like what happens when they click the button? Where does the data go? Which service is responsible for handling that information, etc. Non-functional requirements are something that you think about like in terms of security, performance, usability, and the sort of technical constraints. And when you map out all of those requirements for your next feature, you usually have a pretty good idea of how you should be designing and building the feature that you're supposed to be building. So well-defined requirements result in fewer defects, faster delivery, and happier customers. Obviously, if you know what you're about to do, most likely you do a better job at it. rather than just winging it, like not having any clue what we're going to build. Let's just build something, boom. Then probably you're going to have a lot of defects and you're going to be doing a lot of fixing and going back and forth, iterating. Sometimes that's a good thing. Like if you're building something totally new, that's the way you want to do it, to go really fast. But at the stage of a bigger product with a lot of customers, you cannot do that anymore. Just go wild and go fast and break things, which is the classic saying. And I really like the comic at the bottom saying, especially the last one, that when we have mapped out all of the requirements, a heavy list of technical details, and then there will be the one person saying, yeah, it's be easy to use. And then we scrap every single requirement that we had and start over because, yeah, this was way too complicated. We realized that we had like 2 pages full of requirements. Maybe it will be not easy to use. So let's figure it out. How can we make it better? I know this saying doesn't really translate well to English, but I used to work as a summer job in this sort of a, how would you call it? Maybe landscaping company thingy where I used to be the sort of shovel man at the ditch. And we used to do these scouting of new locations that we're gonna do. And the manager that I had at the time had this saying that when we gone through the plan, like this is what we're supposed to do. We are gonna dig from here to there. This is the place. This is how we do it. And then he used to say this thing called, when you have a plan, only thing in order to finish is to start. In Finnish, it's a bit better. So it's like, I'm not sure how many Finnish-speaking people we have here, a couple at least. I guess I can say it then, it's not too awkward. So it's aloittamista vaille valmis. You get that? Yeah. No, yes, that's the way to say yes. So that's what I want to emphasize. Having a proper plan, knowing what to do will result in higher quality for sure than just winging it every single time. So then we can get into the more maybe technical aspect of this talk where we think about like, okay, why do we even write tests? Yes. Yes, quickly, maybe I'll.
So talking about functional testing in the part when we define, do we build the right product? My question is quality assistant team owns this expertise, or you collaborate with product owners or designers, UX designers in particular?
Yes, we do a lot of collaboration between designers, developers, product owners, etc. And we share that sort of expertise that we might have gathered during the years working with different types of software. Ultimately, obviously, the team will own this area, but we will give the expertise on what sort of pitfalls there might be, what sort of edge case maybe to think about, etc. So we can be this sort of a stakeholder who is supposed to give ideas that the team might not have thought about, that sort of the thing. All right. So this is mostly about when you do build new software, writing a new piece of code. Why would you write a test case for this? Answer is simple. We want the confidence to know that what we build works. It meets the requirements. Like that's the first thing you want to do. Like you either write a test case, or in case of, let's say, building an app, you open the app and try out yourself, make sure, yeah, it works. Okay, now I'm satisfied. Let's bring it to the customers. We want that confidence that it works. You can get that by having a test engineer or a QA do the testing for you. They say, yeah, good to go. But that's not very efficient. But what is efficient is automated tests and writing a lot of those. because then you get very high confidence when you write test cases for different edge cases, different things. You test the smallest piece of code you can find, and then maybe a bit bigger until you end up testing the whole flow of the user at the end. So automated tests are good at performing repetitive tasks fast and the same exact way every single time. If I would be doing an exercise of doing 100 times the same thing, most likely first 10 would be the same, and then it would be a mixed bag of good and very poor results. But the same automated test would do the same thing every single time the same way. You might ask, like, okay, how do we then write these test cases? So I have this piece of code, we have a function that returns something. How do I test this? So you think about it in these concepts of units. You have a small piece of code, which is called a unit, and where you can think about it in a way that you first define the test data, the pre-requirements. What do I need for this to work? Let's say you have a button. You define that by clicking this button, we should move to the next page. The simplest example. So you define the test data to be, when I start the test, we should be on page 1. And when I click this, which is performing the action, we move on to the second page and we assert the result, meaning that, okay, now we are at the second page. Obviously, that is a bit more complicated when you're thinking about just a small piece of code, but essentially that's what you need to grasp. You define something, you do an action, and you assert that something happened. Most likely the thing you wanted to happen, not just that something happened. That's not a good test case, by the way. So then there is this classic question of when should I write tests? Many developers will say that, yeah, I will build this whole feature end to end, and then I'll spend a day writing the tests. That might be a good solution, but then you might miss on the aspect of testability that I brought up in the beginning, which is that if you didn't think about how you're going to test this along the way that you were implementing it, and then when it's all done, you're like, whew, now I can write the tests. Then you realize that, yeah, I cannot actually test this part of the code at all. Then you're going to say to the team leader, yeah, I need one more day, actually. Yeah, it's going to be next week. I need some more time. I didn't think this through. So what I would suggest is that you write some piece of code, a small, easy, like an isolated unit, and test that. Then you're like, yes, this works. Next one, you build something on top of that. You test that. That is something of a sort of test-driven development. But in test-driven development, you would do it actually the other way around, where you would first write the test case that, okay, this is what I want. And then you're going to write the code that does this thing. So it's a bit of a mind shift change. I don't necessarily advocate that for everyone because it's super hard to do well and efficiently. But that's a good exercise if you end up coding something for fun or ending up having a career as a developer, is to experiment with, let's first write this test case. And when you run it, it will fail. Then you write the piece of code a bit, it will fail again. Then you make sure that that test case passes by implementing the feature the right way. And then when it passes, you move on to the next one. I want this feature to work like this. And then you build the feature like that. So essentially you are putting like hard requirements on yourself in how to build the system. Usually that ends up in having a very high quality because you have been testing every single step of the way, not just at the end. Where at the end, fighting bugs is very costly. Like for us, a customer finding out that there's a bug in the app is going to be very expensive. Whereas if you would find that same bug the very first day you started to implement this, you can still fix it and no one even noticed. You don't tell anyone. I didn't even make any bugs. So it's way better like that. But that TDD is not for everyone. A huge disclaimer. All right, which brings us a bit to the software part, where you will get to do another exercise, a bit of an icebreaker, if you will. So we're going to do a 2-minute exercise of, if you have a Wolt app on your phone, if you don't, no judgment. That's cool. You don't need to do this. But if you could pull out your phone and add a new address to your profile, you can add whatever address, maybe add your neighbor's address, maybe at your summer house, at the Wolt HQ, which is there as an example. Arkadiankatu 6 is the address. So you can go ahead, open the app. It shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. You probably have done this before. When you first installed the app, you added your own home address. But after you have done this exercise, I'm going to go a bit through like how can we test this in the code. But yeah, let's take a quick 2 minutes for this. All right, it doesn't matter if you didn't go to the end. You can obviously delete the Wolt HQ address from your Wolt account after this. Don't worry about it. This was just an exercise for you to understand what this feature is of adding a new address. And then I'm going to show you how we could test this. So I'm going to show you a piece of code. How many of you actually have some coding experience? Okay, pretty many. Okay, good. Then I might need to explain every single thing here, but let's first talk about the types of testing before I show you the code examples. So we have this terminology in QA world or testing called testing pyramid that shows you and illustrates how you should be dividing different types of testing in your code, meaning that at the top of the pyramid, you have a small amount of end-to-end tests. End-to-end tests are sort of large. They might be a bit slow to execute because those are doing the exact like user interactions with the page. Like let's say you have an app. In the test, you would go through this whole flow of adding the customer address to your profile and making sure that at the end, we see the new address on your profile. So that's like the very big test case. It's slow, maybe to write, slow to execute, but it brings you a lot of confidence that, okay, this whole thing works. Like I just build the new address adding and now I run this test. I'm pretty sure that it works. I saw the test do it. It should work. It's essentially the same that you would do manually, which is even more slower to do if you would be like potentially you now just discover that it's not as easy to do as I maybe thought. Then we move down on the pyramid where we do have this layer of integration tests. Integration tests is a vague term to describe integrations between different modules of the code. Let's say we have like A, B, and C, how these interact with each other. Maybe the data flows from A to B and then to C. We first want to make sure that the integration between A and B works, and we want to make sure that the integration between B and C works, and then the whole thing as well as an integration. At the bottom, we should have a lot of those super small, simple unit tests. The thing that I explained previously is that when you build like a really small piece of code, you build a test for this to make sure that that line works. You should have a lot of those in your code base to make sure that the smallest pieces of your puzzle work, and then move up the ladder in the pyramid. All right, that's about that. Some code examples. this is somewhat of a real code that we have, a bit modified for the purpose of this session, but this is essentially the flow of the user. How would you go about adding your new address? As you can see, we do perform the actions that the user would be doing. So on the, thinking maybe should I point at something, but maybe you can figure it out. So we click on this address select button. We click on a new address button. So we first click the input, then we click like, okay, let's type in this, my new address. You input or fill, in this case, Arkadiankatu 6, which is the address. Then there will be a maps suggestion that, hey, is this the place you wanted? We are going to click that. Yes, this is the one we would like to add. We click continue. Then we choose the address type. It will be office for the Wolt HQ. Then we give it a name. We fill in Wolt HQ. And then we click continue and save. We don't fill in any of the additional details. Maybe you should do that, but we don't in this exercise. And then at the end, we do the same exact thing, which is making sure that now as a user, I can see this new address on my profile. It should say Arkadiankatu 6 as the address. It should have a type office, and it should have a name of Wolt HQ. And when you run this test case on your app, you have a pretty high confidence of this exact flow working. And you can imagine how this would work out if you would do this manually. And let's say you need to do this 100 times manually. How long would that take? I don't know, half a day, maybe. I don't know, depending on different conditions, I guess. But if you run this end-to-end test case, which would probably be somewhere in the ballpark of 10 seconds to do the whole thing, and you run that 100 times, then you can clearly see that this scales very well to make sure every time we do small changes to this feature, we can run this test and make sure that the feature works. Okay, then as an example of integration test, which apparently doesn't show up on Zoom yet again. Cool. Let me do once more the fiddling of, oh yeah, now I got the Zoom. I bet there's like a timer that says like, hey, Untamo, please stop sharing after 20 minutes or so. Bear with me, I'll do it only once more, hopefully. So, integration test for this would be that behind the scenes, when you select the country that you're going to add your address to, we're going to call this endpoint in the backend services that we have to check what address fields should we show to the user when they do add their new address. So we check that, first of all, we can get the response from the backend service or the server. We check that obviously the response is not none, so it does contain some fields. And then we make sure that, okay, in that response, we find the Finland from the countries and we assert those different fields where the name field should be Finland, alpha 2 code should be FI, and the flag image should be from this URL. So this is sort of an integration test for the server to make sure that in a specific country we get the right fields. I stripped out a bunch of different things that we assert here because it would have been a bit of a mess on the slides, but you can probably figure out like how this would be extended to cover the office layout. Like for the office, you might want to put like a floor or something like this. So that is the integration between the server. Then there is these default office address fields that we want to make sure that are present in the code for Finland as a country. So we get with this function called get office address fields, We define the country to be Finland, and we get office address fields. And here we have declared that we expect the fields to be building name, entrance, office, reception, floor, company name, additional instructions. And then we make sure that with this get address field IDs, we pass that the office address, or actually we pass in the address fields, and then we check, does these two things match in the code? Does it have all of the building names and entrances and offices and floors? So essentially, this is just testing that one single function that we have in the code and making sure that it works. And when you build all of these three different test types together, you get a whole bunch of confidence that when you, in this event, go and add a address to your user account, it will work. We have a bunch of different types of testing on top of those three that I just mentioned. Which ones I like to highlight are the performance testing. So making sure that it's performant under different conditions. There can be a lot of simultaneous users, stuff like that. Accessibility is a huge point. Like we need to make sure that everyone can use the app everywhere. And we need to be accessible. One thing which is a bit of a technical term is exploratory testing. That is essentially the thing that I was mentioning at the beginning with the backpack, that you just don't do like this checkbox of, can I carry it on my back? But you do this exploration of, how can I carry it on my back? How can I take it off my back? And these sort of things where you do this exploration of how the customer will use the system and discover improvements along the way. And there are many more different types of testing as well that we like to discuss as well. But I think those are the things you should remember from this slide. As a recap of why manual testing is not necessarily the best way to do things, is that, yeah, it is slow and prone to error. When you do things over and over again, you start to miss things. You default to doing this every single time. This way you might miss that, oh yeah, this has changed in some way. Errors are bound to happen. So automate tests are very, very performant. You can run these at the same time, like millions of tests at the same time. With less resources spent, you get higher coverage, which is that you cover more features by writing more of these test cases. Whereas in manual testing, you might get a large coverage by testing everything, but then you miss on the details because, well, you cannot see everything, and it's very time consuming to do the whole testing manually, like the whole app to go through it. Obviously, automated tests improve the productivity of the developers. They see immediate feedback. Yeah, I ran the test, it doesn't work, I need to fix it. Whereas sending the build to a QA to test and they get the feedback tomorrow, yeah, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let me write you a bug report. You get it the next day and you're like, oh yeah, it didn't work like this. Oh, I need to go and fix it, spend another day. It's very, very inefficient for everyone. So learn payoffs and priorities of each of these different types of testing to use them effectively. Think about like, how can I test this the most efficient way? You should be sort of lazy as a person to think like, okay, what is the easiest way for me to test this? If your answer is going to say, yeah, let's send it to the QA, that's not probably the most effective way of using these testing types. And it doesn't scale. You get the feedback very late. So understanding when to use different things is of key importance. Which brings us to the last slide, which is the takeaway. Quality is a shared responsibility, obviously. There cannot be just one person being like, yeah, now you are our quality person. You make sure that we write quality software. It can work, but that person needs to be like a superhuman. in some way, that they know every single thing. They know ins and outs of the software and every single thing. So it should be shared. Everyone should care that we build a high quality product. And everyone is a tester. Like, as you saw in the beginning, it's very easy to figure out test cases when you kind of put your mind into it, finding different ways to test things. Like, it's not rocket science that we do as a QA, that we step on the computer and bam, we just find bugs like everywhere. Obviously there is some expertise that you know what sort of things can break. You have seen them before. People make the same mistakes always. That's like the way developers always do the same mistakes. We need to point those mistakes to them so they learn, and next time they won't be anymore making the same mistakes. Repetition works. Be customer obsessed and the user obsessed, I think, to understand what sort of product you're building. Think like your user. How is the user going to use the system, your product? That will bring the highest results. And most of all, build high quality products and not just lines of code. Thank you, everyone. I think that at this point we move on to QA or Q&A, I guess. But before getting any questions from the chat, here's a sweet reminder to everyone that, hey, we have open jobs. Please do apply. We have cool things that we are building, especially in Wolt Market, where I am at. So you get to work with me as well. Let's get some questions if there are some from the chat. So Senja, maybe you can ask them and I try my best to answer.
Great. So we have 4 questions in the chat. And afterwards, if you have any questions here, Isabella will go through and give you the microphone. And I hope you can hear me because this mic is a little quiet. But anyways, let's go to the questions. So, alrighty. First of all, Sunny asks here, does your test base on acceptance criteria?
Could you maybe repeat? I got confused when Isabella's face showed up on the...
Does your tests base on acceptance criteria?
Yes, that's a good point. If you do acceptance criteria for your implementation, where you sort of define how this feature or part of the code should work, then that's a very easy way to sort of define your test cases. Like you say that, okay, in order for this feature to work correctly, it needs to do this and this and this. When you look at that list of things, you're like, yeah, these are actually the test cases I should be writing. So what I like to emphasize for people that in the planning phase, let's say the product lead, who is supposed to have like the best information about what the product is, how it's going to be used. So they sort of know the acceptance criteria already. They can write it out for the developer. And then when developer picks up the ticket to implement this, then they clearly see that, okay, I need to fulfill these things. And while I write the code to fulfill it, let's then put these same things into a test cases and make sure that it works according to the requirements. So yes.
Great. Then the next question is from Gabriella. How was Wolt before quality assistance and which challenges did you face along the way, especially in regards to the quality mindset education?
Well, I would say that we are still sort of transitioning into this phase. Like this is a relatively new thing, the quality assistance that we are doing. There are still places around Wolt where we do resort to heavy manual testing done by the QAs, that's for sure. But there are reasons for that because we want to make sure that those parts of the app or the system are of highest of quality. And when we have dedicated persons who do only sort of testing and making sure they know like ins and outs of the system, they can figure out these improvements, which then contributes to very high quality on those aspects. So we are kind of learning. We have a lot of teams that do take the ownership of things when you sort of are there to guide them, give them way to take the ownership. Like it doesn't happen just by clicking your like fingers. Like it needs to be repeated, worked with the teams, be there in the plannings, coaching the developers, doing the same thing for the millionth time. And then it eventually becomes a habit and sort of a cultural thing. And then everything kind of follows after that.
Great. Then let's take one more question from here, and then we'll take a couple questions from the room as well. So Moruf is asking, what are common ways at work through which you collect information from your customers, and who are your customers? Courier partners, Wolt app users, restaurateurs, or all of them?
Yeah, that's a good topic. As an example, for me, working in Wolt Market, we build the sort of back office tools for the Wolt Markets. In there, our users are mostly like the operations, like grocery associates who are at our dark stores, picking up the products for the orders, and then the courier partner comes in and picks up the order to deliver it. We have a lot of channels for the users to give us direct feedback. Like Slack is a good example because we are building an internal tool. They are our like employees, so they can give us the direct feedback very well. That's one way, obviously. Then there are ways to collect anonymized. That's not the word. Anyway, that's too hard a word. Anyway, to collect data, how users use the systems. It's called telemetry data. So you map out like, okay, when person clicks this button, then we fire an event and we can collect those and see, let's say, how many users do add a new address every month or something like that. And based on that, we can do assumptions of, yeah, this is the pain point. Like this is the phase of adding a new address where people drop out and they feel like, yeah, I cannot do it. This is too hard. So we can figure out based on that what is the problem and how we can then solve it with the product. So there are multiple ways. Direct feedback from the customers is the best, in my opinion.
All right. So then let's take some questions from the audience here. Anyone? Or shall we continue with the online? Okay.
Thank you. I am checking the open positions that you mentioned and came to think about how do you take into account the testing in your recruitment? Like, do you specifically ask candidates questions about this, or do they need to write a test, or maybe like test some concrete thing? Or so I imagine that, you know, you have this new philosophy, you will want in the future all the people who come in to also be in this mindset.
Yeah, that's a good topic. For the developers and for the engineering roles in general at Wolt, we have this hiring funnel where we do get like a first hiring call with the person who is applying, and then they need to fill in a home assignment that they do on their own. And in that home assignment, they need to actually implement something in code. And a clear winners from those who write the assignments and do the assignments are the ones who wrote a lot of tests. They made sure that it works. So when you as a reviewer, like I've been reviewing the QA assignments, for example, in our case, it's a bit different because we don't expect them to write code and test for that. But I'm imagining for a person applying for a backend developer role, the person who is reviewing the code, first thing they're going to do before even jumping anywhere is run the tests and see if there is any. If there's none, then they're going to be like, okay, why? And then after that, they're going to try it out. So that's a good way to kind of, if you want to think about like how to get into like a developer role, is to make sure that you test it properly, or your implementation. We need that, and that's a requirement on the assignment. Like if you've done nothing in terms of testing, then it's most likely going to be a pass on our side. You're not going to get to the technical interview at all to discuss your thing. So yes, we do have these sort of requirements.
So top tip if anyone wants to apply. Any other questions from here? Yes.
And going back to the first question you got about the criteria that is filled in by the PO. Who finally tested? Is it the QA or the PO who wrote it in the ticket? Or is it some other developer? And who decides like, okay, this ticket is done?
That's a good point. It can be any of those. It can be all of those. In our case, for example, as I mentioned, the testing parties is that during those testing parties, we usually go about like having a checklist sort of test cases that we want to cover. And then we all do the testing for those. So it's not just a single person. Obviously, we're not having testing parties for every single feature because that's not very efficient. So we rely on the developer who built the feature to test it themselves. So they are there to make sure that it was fulfilled and they wrote tests for it. Obviously, there are like times when you didn't maybe do that. You can ask, for example, for me to jump in on a pair testing session and let's test it together. I can test it for you, sure. That can be also arranged, but usually it's defaulted to being the developer to do the thing. Like if you implement it, you are essentially the person who is supposed to make sure that it works. And in testing parties, we bring that into this sort of a session where everyone can make sure that it works and we understand what we built.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Is there anyone in person who would want to ask one more? No? So let's take them online then.
All right, so we have here actually Sanni and Salonepi asking on the metrics and KPIs for how to measure quality. And so, yeah, how do you measure your quality of the product or quality of the development? And what kind of metrics, KPIs you have for the quality?
That's a good topic. That is something that we have been working on actually this year quite a bit in the QA team, understanding what are the sort of metrics that we at Wolt would like to look at and see the trends where we are at. I guess as an example, one clear quality metric for the mobile apps is the store rating. Like what is it in the app stores? Is it 4.7? Is it 4.9 in the Apple Store or in the Google Play Store? That's like a really easy. A bit of vague. I admit that it doesn't really tell like, is it a really good product that everyone has said like, yeah, 5 stars, but it does give us some value that, okay, we are not a 3 out of 5. We are at 4.9, let's say. We are pretty good. So that's obviously one easy metric to follow. Then there are multiple different things, but I'm a bit hesitant in like just following those as a KPIs for quality, because quality is so subjective. If you put a number on a quality, then people start to sort of play games over that number. Like let's say you would measure the amount of bugs in your application in production. The customers have said that there are this and this many bugs. Then an easy way to decrease that number of bugs in production is by not filing the bugs at the first place. Isn't that great? Like, let's not say that we have a bug. Like, let's say to every single bug that we get a report from that, yeah, we're not going to fix it. It's not a big deal. You have a workaround, do this. We're not going to fix it. And then we have like, yeah, we don't have any bugs in production. So people start to play these sort of games when it comes to quality metrics quite easily, because those are easy to do. Like you can say like, yeah, let's not fix this. Let's put this on the backlog. Yeah, we're not going to fix this. Or this is so easy that the developer actually went ahead and fixed it already. We didn't even file any bug report on this because it was so quick to fix, which in my opinion is the best way to go. Like you fix it immediately and then you move on. So it's sort of a double-edged sword when it comes to metrics, and we are trying to figure out what it means for us. We have some ideas, but yeah, I'm not going to say them out loud because those are not final.